Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I will give everybody just a second to settle in before we get started. I'd like to go over a few things and just to let you know that this is a webinar format, which means your microphones and your cameras are turned off by default. We will have the chat option if you need to reach out to panelists or if you need to reach out to me. Today, we will not have opportunity for the Q&A section where we ask questions, as we may not have sufficient time to answer questions, and Craig will let you a little bit more about this. However, if you would like to turn on your closed captions, please do so on the bottom of the Zoom screen. And this is a recorded webinar, so if you need to watch it again, or if you want to send it to someone to watch this recording, please do so. And without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to Craig Canfield.
Thank you so much, Belma. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar on promoting student success through belonging, how you can make a difference. So we're very excited to be here to share with you all today. My name is Craig Canfield. I use he and they pronouns, and I am the Director for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at CourseLeaf. And for those of you who may not be familiar with CourseLeaf, we are a curricular management software company. We do everything from helping you manage your curriculum, publish your catalog, get students registered for courses, make syllabi, all sorts of different things. So I'll be talking a little bit more about what we do toward the end, but we are very excited to be a sponsor of this webinar and working with ACRO to put this together. And it is my absolute joy and pleasure to be here with three absolutely phenomenal people who I will let introduce themselves. But without going on too much longer, I'll hand it over. And to my panelists, I'll ask each of you if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, sharing your pronouns, your institutional affiliations, and kind of a little bit of information about your institutions. Kind of a little brief background in how you kind of came to where you are and what really prompted you to get into the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and how that kind of ties into student success. So I'm going to go ahead. We'll start with Kelly, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Craig, and thanks for having me here today. I'm really excited to be a part of this panel. So my name is Kelly Campbell, she, her, and I'm the interim vice provost for academic affairs and also one of 3 co-chief diversity officers at California State University, San Bernardino. And I just wanted to share a little bit about the context of our institution for those who aren't familiar. So I'm at one of 23 campuses. The California State University system is the nation's largest and most diverse four-year public university system. This particular campus is designated as Hispanic serving, and we have about 17,000 students who are mostly undergraduate. They're 80% first generation, 70% from historically excluded groups, and 80% reliant on financial assistance. San Bernardino is a huge county, larger than many states put together, and we have about 2 million people. And the city of San Bernardino, so most of our students come from the region here. So the city of San Bernardino has a high poverty rate of about 20% and a high school dropout rate of about 29%. So in serving the students from this region, we really do transform our students' lives, which is part of our mission statement, and we have been ranked 13th by U.S. News and World Report for increasing social mobility. As for myself, I'm really interested in this work because I too was a first-generation university student. I do come from a low-income family myself, and I've personally felt the power of education in transforming my own life, and so I really want to help our students do the same. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. And next, April.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing time with us this afternoon. My name is April Ruiz. I use she, her, and Asia pronouns, and I'm at Wesleyan University, where I serve as the Dean for Academic Equity, Inclusion, and Success, and also Interim Vice President overseeing the Division for Equity and Inclusion. Wesleyan is a private selective liberal arts university. We're a member of NESCAC, the New England Small College Athletic Conference, and also COFI, the Consortium on Financing Higher Education, alongside institutions like Amherst and Middlebury. We have about 3,000 undergraduates and a few small master's and PhD programs, which gets us that university name instead of college. You may have seen us in the news recently as ending any preference for legacy students through our admission process. We're also making some repeated and wonderful advances in the ways that we offer financial aid to students. We have a free computer program for our highest need students. We're moving away from loans in our packages and a couple other really exciting developments that help us to make sure that Wesleyan as an institution is accessible to all the students who can get the most out of their education through our university. I am also going to interrupt my introduction just to let folks know I have COVID. I'm sorry for the staccato in my voice, so thank you for your grace and patience. I'm drawn to this work because, like Kelly, I also attended university as a first generation and low income student. I attended a highly selective private institution as a first gen, low income, Latina female when no one was talking about what it meant to be any of those things in that sort of space. And looking back on my education all those many years ago, and thinking about all the ways that perhaps I didn't feel like those spaces were for me. And I did have some challenge in figuring out how to navigate it in a way where I could really take ownership of the choices that I was making and feeling supported. So it feels really wonderful to be in work that allows me to center students who have identities that have been historically excluded from these spaces, and to think about the ways that our policies and practices can align with the values that we all share and that we advertise in our mission statements around access, belonging, equity, and success for our students.
Thank you, April. And Nicole.
Aya cheke ewe makeke neweta winswiane miamia tawenge Nicole winswiane akala shama tawenge Nila miamia iakwa missiane katina himitosinia. Hello, all my relatives. Neweta is my traditional name, which means she speaks. Nicole is my English name. I am a citizen of the Miamia or the Miami Nation of Oklahoma, and I strive to live as a proper human. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I too am a first generation college graduate. I'm still the only graduate in my family, and I too struggled. I felt invisible and I felt stereotyped as an Indigenous person when I was actually made visible. I also have the privilege of serving as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the University of Texas System. And you might have heard of us. We've been in the news lately around DEI. UT System has an enrollment of more than 254,000 students at 9 academic and 5 health institutions across the state. Most of our institutions are Hispanic serving or seeking that designation. And we are looking to be one of the first, and I believe it's with Cal State, one of the first systems that are given a Hispanic serving designation. At UT System, I lead and support student success initiatives system-wide. I work with all 8 of our academic institutions. 9, sorry, we just added SFA, student Stephen F. Austin. And my portfolio includes everything from K-12 to college institutional readiness, dev ed, co-rec, capacity building, degree completion, interinstitutional online education, educator preparation. And I'm also the de facto point person for all things Indigenous. So I firmly believe that even though because of SB 17, we've had to dismantle all of our DEI offices, I firmly believe that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are at the heart of student success, whether or not we have an office that is dedicated to it. So I'm pleased to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly, April, and Nicole for your introductions. And hopefully all of you attending can see why I'm so excited to be here moderating this conversation, because it's just a wonderful panel we have. And just before we jump into the questions and kind of the conversation, I wanted to just restate what Belma had mentioned earlier, that unfortunately, just because we want to have a richness of the conversation here and we're limited to an hour, I don't, I felt we wouldn't be able to have a meaningful Q&A and still have a meaningful discussion. So we've decided not to have a formal Q&A at the end of this, but definitely feel free to reach out after the fact to me or to Belma if you have questions, and we can help get those answered for you. And I also just wanted to say that, they're not part of. The reason we're having this panel is because, we all firmly believe, but it's also very much backed in research, in data, that the idea of student belonging leads to better student outcomes, student success. And so we do this work because we love to do it. It's personal to us, but also it is really proven that when students feel like they belong in a campus, they have better graduation rates, better retention rates, and just overall better lives. And so the work we do to promote inclusion and belonging on campuses is extremely important. So we're going to dive into kind of what this means, and hopefully offer some kind of very practical takeaways that you can take to your institutions, to your campuses, and run with after this. So we're going to start off with kind of a general, broad question, and think really about this idea of belonging. And I just talked a little bit about belonging and its importance, but what does the term belonging even mean in the context of higher education? And I'd also like to think about how does that sense of belonging affect student success? I mentioned some of the research behind it, but wondering if you would, be willing to expand a little bit about that in your personal experiences.
Can share a little bit. What I failed to mention in my intro is that I come from faculty in psychology, and my area of research is in relationships. And so belonging is a big thing in that field. People who don't feel a sense of belonging, they get sick faster and they die sooner. So it's one of the essential needs of life, just like food and water and breathing. And so in that sense, you could just understand it's right at the base, it's at the foundation. And in terms of higher ed specifically, we need to think about the extent to which students, staff, and faculty and administrators feel a sense of connection, of acceptance, of inclusion, of feeling understood. Like people really understand you. They really get you at this university. Feeling like this university is where you're supposed to be. I fit here. That's what sense of belonging is in higher ed. And so we need to not only be attentive to and thinking about the diverse needs of the population here, but we need to be engaging in actions that create that sense of belonging. So ensuring that we're addressing those diverse needs, so that people have full access, have power sharing, and feel that while they are here and in their interactions with people and in their various settings and groups, that they feel understood, they feel respected, and they feel validated. And you've mentioned obviously some of those student success outcomes. One that I could add is right now we see that students across the nation are struggling with mental health, which then of course affects their physical health. So when they have sense of belonging, their health and well-being is better. And so that keeps them here, in addition to, many other things. I don't want to take up too much time and allow the space for my panelists to weigh in as well. But that's just one piece that I'll mention.
Great, thank you. Anyone like to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I think that says so much, right? And gets us to that kind of the core around why belonging is important. You know, there's this core of it's the right thing to do, right? It's the right thing to cultivate. It's what we want in our communities, right? There is no community without belonging, and you know, community I think underpins what a successful institution can be, right? As whether we're a school where there are commuter students or whether we're a residential institution, there are these social dimensions in addition to the academic dimensions, and these are woven together in what it means for a student to go through the curriculum. You know, oftentimes I describe belonging in the higher education context as each student being equipped and also feeling securely supported and empowered to take advantage of all of the opportunities and the experiences and the benefits that their institution affords those students, whether those are academic or social or perspective changing or mind blowing or whatever else that might be. And it's a student being truly able to get everything out of their college experience that they hope to and that they deserve to, without feeling as if there are barriers or signals from the institution or the institutional community that would slow them down or turn them away or cause them to turn away. And we know this from our human experience, right? Like when we feel at ease in a space, when we feel that there are no barriers, that no one's signaling us to slow down, we put forth our best effort. We can bring our best selves to our goals and to the things that we're striving toward and to the connections that we're building. And when we don't feel at ease, we can't do that. And as you said, you know, the research backs this up. When students are feeling othered in some kind of way, their academic performance will take a hit. Even when that experience of being othered happened outside of the classroom in which that academic performance is being measured. So this is, you know, just if we're thinking about academic performance narrowly, like one of the reasons that this creating a sense of belonging is everyone's job at an institution. If we're thinking about persistence, if we're thinking about retention, if we're thinking about our students graduating from our institutions with the things we hope that they will have.
I'd love to build off of that. I think that what we also have to remember, in addition to everything you both have said, is that higher education is not value neutral, right? Each group of students, particularly historically minoritized student populations, has a history with higher ed, and many times that history has not been good. So there is a deep-seated, historically rooted mistrust of higher education or education in general. And a lot of the things that we do on our institutions, on our campuses, whether it's through our policies, procedures, our rituals, our songs, our, you know, in our classrooms, can either convey to a student you belong here, or it's going to convey to them that no, you don't. And sometimes these are intentionals. Well, I'd like to think that they're never intentional unless they're positive, right? But frequently they're unintentional, but they're still conveying those messages. So, you know, I've seen the flip side of that. So my tribe has a tribally driven but university located research center at Miami University, which is located on our historical tribal lands that we were removed from. And we have a wonderful partnership with the university. And what we've seen in this particular case just, you know, underscores everything you've said, that if you have a curriculum that students can see themselves in, that's asset-based, that's brings in an appreciation and a learning of their own language, and has this social component where their identities are validated and embraced, they do better. And so you'll see the Indigenous student graduation rates and retention rates have skyrocketed at Miami University because of this program. And I do think that while we can't all recreate you know, a tribally driven research center at a university, what we can do is really take some of those lessons and put them into practice in our own institutions. And then just always have in the back of your mind that, again, every group of students has a historical relationship with higher ed that is going to be shaping how they bring themselves to our campuses. Lastly, I'll say at UT system, belonging is one of the three key pillars of student success. So it's belonging, financial resources, and advising. But even if they have the financial resources and the good advising, if the belonging piece is not there, they will not succeed, or it'll be a much steeper hill for them to climb.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And just kind of building and maybe going a little more particular with this, I wanted to talk about a little bit about the use of language. And Nicole, you talked about it in a very specific context of learning Indigenous language, but I'm thinking a little more broader just about how we speak, the words we use, and the academic environment itself, right? Where it can be very complicated language. It could be, language at a particular reading level that might not be accessible to everyone, terminology that's not understood, or just perhaps terminology that others people. I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit about kind of what role our language and how we speak, how we talk plays into this idea of belonging. And kind of what is the use of inclusive language?
I don't know if we're following our same order, but I'll just adhere to that for now.
Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking about it in terms of like the first interaction a prospective student might have with the university could be something like web pages. So even the language that we use on web pages is very important. So in written materials, like you mentioned, the reading level, but also the specific terms that we're using. Also, of course, the images that we're putting out there. I was recently co-chaired our strategic plan development last year, and in the final published plan that we put up on the website, we wanted to make sure that the photos we were using really reflected our student population. And then beyond language, well, I guess I'll say one more thing around language, that we need to also, so as I mentioned, I was a professor for almost 15 years before I came into my current role at our university here. And so the examples that we're using in class and showing that we understand our students' culture and background and traditions, that's very important. So learning Spanish. So for example, I learned Spanish, or just pronouncing students' names correctly and not using another default name that might be easier or shortened. I think that's very important. And then let me say one more thing, that it's not just about language, but also how we communicate. So the nonverbals as well. So things like our tone, that we're using active listening, like turning to face the student and looking at them in the eye, rather than doing something like being on a computer or multitasking while they're talking to us, being very consistent in that communication. All those things demonstrate to our students, to staff, to people we're interacting with, that they really matter, that we value them, that we respect them. And so I think even beyond just the language itself and the words, also the nonverbals that accompany that is very important. And then just one last thing related to our strategic plan that we were looking to explore for these next 5 years is how much can we translate our materials as well. So looking at how many languages can we offer, at least in Spanish, not just English, but even maybe beyond that. So for web pages, brochures, and all those official materials, to see if we can have them in multiple languages.
In addition to all of that great information, I would say that we've gotten feedback about, students who will get denied a course, for example, and either there will be so little information about what they can do to do something different, or they're given so much information that the language in it is unclear, that it's too much information, and then they feel completely stumped by what to do next. So sometimes it's not just what we're saying, but how we're saying and how much we're saying in that. I think that framing is also incredibly important, and I want to bring up here a particular example of like academic probation letters, for example. So you can frame a letter that is notifying a student that they are on academic probation in a way that normalizes academic difficulty or challenge, and says, for example, hey, we want you here. We know that your first year at college can be challenging as you are juggling work and academics and new social circumstances. Here are some academic supports you can take advantage of. Or you could say, you're on academic probation and this is a warning. We're going to kick you out if you don't turn things around, which I'm sure no one says it quite that directly, but perhaps they do. And one is either conveying to students, hey, we believe in you. There's a reason why we admitted you into our school. Or the other is confirming for many of these students the imposter syndrome that is living deeply in them already. So I do think that the framing of our communications with students is really, really important. And I think that we need to take a little bit more time and effort and intentionality and thinking and how we're communicating with students, even with complete like pro forma kind of notices like academic probation.
I'd love, thank you so much for that, Nicole. I want to build on the idea of normalization, because I think there are also some like small changes we can make in the ways that we interact with students when we have oftentimes really good intentions, right? So we're communicating that, you know, volume of information. Maybe there's a complex process they have to go through, or maybe it's something that we think is as routine as registering for your classes. You know, we know many of our students, particularly our first generation to college students who might not have folks in their home community who can support them in that process, might feel a little lost around the steps, the what's next, particularly if they encounter an error or there's some issue. And in an effort to be helpful, we might, for example, make space for questions and say, does that make sense? Or like, do you have any questions? And for a student who's facing that imposter syndrome, where they've been getting signals, I got this error, this didn't work, I'm in this office, there's so many people who have questions, I'm not sure if I belong here, I'm not sure if I can take up space. Sometimes to say something like, does that make sense, to a student can be terrifying for them to admit, yep, that doesn't make sense for me. That takes some degree of courage to like out yourself as still being confused when you've gotten all these other signals that things just aren't going your way. So sometimes there can be like small changes to the ways that we ask those same questions that can normalize the fact that it is confusing. You can frame it by saying, this is a lot of information that I just gave you. What questions do you have? Because that just like puts out there, it is normal to have questions. I expect you to have questions. I just want you to tell me which questions you have, which ones feel like priority to you. Instead of saying, you know, does that make sense? Just saying something like, which parts of that should I reinforce for you? Because that was a lot of information. And those might seem like small changes, but for that student who is feeling like they don't belong in that moment, that they're on the verge of everything falling apart, for you to create a more normalized space where they can be confused and where you can partner with them and help to resolve some of that confusion for them can make a world of difference in the way that that student is going to engage with you and engage with your office and ultimately engage with the curriculum.
Absolutely, really, really great thoughts on from each of you, and really starting to get into some of these best practices too, which is really great, because that's what we're here for, right? At the end of the day, you know, hoping to give folks kind of some tangible things that they can take with them, and so kind of leading further into that, maybe we can transition and talk a little bit more specifically about best practices and initiatives. And so I guess the question might be, what specific kind of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging initiatives or practices, and specifically things that could be implemented by individuals or departments, you know, thinking very locally, what kind of initiatives or practices have been particularly effective or successful, either in your roles or your institutions, or systems? And you know, again, and think about like specific strategies that have maybe measurable impacts that you know, that again, that folks could really take and run with. You've already mentioned some, so.
I can mention some from different perspectives. So when I was a professor, it was really important to me, even in very large classes, to learn students' names. And so even when I had 300 students, I would try and do some each day. And so, whether it be the students that always raise their hand, I would say before they ask their question, what's your name? And I'd learn those ones, but I'd also circulate before class for those who don't raise their hands, just to meet some of them and then make sure I go use those names every time and circulate through to talk to my students. So that's just letting them know that they're seen and that I value them and I see them and I notice when they're not there. And I did notice if they weren't there, I would say, oh, I noticed you weren't in class last time, even in those very big classes. The other example I'll give, two examples maybe, they relate to the very same premise. It's that they are seen, even in this very large setting where they're noticing a big difference from their high schools or their community colleges. They think they're anonymous to us, and we need to make sure that they're not anonymous to us and that they realize they're not. And so in my current role, some of the things that I've implemented was basically last year I had this intervention where any students at risk for failing a course at midpoint were referred to me, and then I got them in touch with the academic advisors. Their academic advisors reached out, and we have a centralized model where they develop a relationship with that single advisor for the entire course of their time with us. So they have that one person the whole time here. And their advisor would learn what was affecting their success in the course. And it could be anything like basic needs like housing insecurity, food insecurity, or mental health concerns, or the course is too difficult, so they need tutoring, mentoring, all those kind of things, a wide range. And then the advisor would connect them with supports. And we found that for students who responded and met with the advisor and got referred out for supports, they were 3 times more likely to pass the course than those who did not, respond to the advisor, reach out. So that was one thing. And then based on that premise, we also have a button now, I guess you could call it, in the faculty and the students portal on both sides. And if a student or if a faculty notices a student is struggling with something, they can go use that button and fill out a report to say what it is they're struggling with. And immediately they'll be contacted by the care team. They'll be triaged out. What is it that you need? And they'll get those supports that they need. So we know that works. And it's just a way to, for professors to say, we're noticing that you haven't been attending. We're noticing, or you've reported to me this stressor, and we're going to be responsive to you. So it's kind of based on the same premise where there was a professor in my current role. It's noticing them. They're not anonymous to us.
I feel like this question could be so many things, right? The focus of like whole conferences is folks' whole life works, right? Like what best practices for a DEIB. So maybe I can be a little general here, but I would say one might be like define everything. Define everything. So many of our institutions, like we love acronyms. It's just a thing that I think happens a lot in higher ed, or specialized terminology or languages, and just like don't take any of that for granted for anyone. Define everything. What are office hours? How should students be using them? What should they expect when they go? What are some of the things that they can talk about there? What if office hours don't work with their schedule? Just unpack every concept for students. What's a TA session, or what's a section, or what's a review session? How does that fit into the wider, bigger picture of that class? How does that fit in? I encourage faculty as they're constructing syllabi to define how each of the assignments that they're assigning in the syllabus feeds into the learning objectives that they have for the class. You can kind of like look at helping students to look under the hood so they can see the mechanism, so they know how they fit in, how things should be functioning. It gives students a better sense of whether or not they feel off track, because they know what they should be doing or feeling, or how they should be engaging. And individually, we've had a lot of success in hosting sessions for students where we do things like demystifying office hours, and we just spend 45 minutes talking about and workshopping and practicing how you might engage with a professor in that space. We do sessions with students around the university library and how it's different than your high school library, and what are some of the resources that are available there how can you take advantage of them, at what point should you engage them, how they could serve you based on the things that you're working on, what are the cool possibilities through the library. And the data that we have through our programming is that the students who are getting that insight are using those resources with higher frequency than the students who are told, oh, there's a library and here's the list of the things that you can do there without that exposition. So I'm taking the time and the space to define how students should engage and how it's specific and relevant to what their goals are can give students the information they need to feel brave enough to go and engage because they know how it works.
April, I feel like you were talking about me in undergrad. So I came from a very small town. None of my family had gone to college. I automatically got accepted into UT Austin because I was in the top 10% at the time. And I have to say that, I went to UT, I took an art history course, loved it. There was a discussion section attached to it. Being an introvert, I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to skip that. Had no idea that it was actually a mandatory thing. Nobody explained to me what a discussion section was. So that was a really hard lesson for me to learn, but I learned it very well. I never missed another one. So totally agree with everything you just said. Another thing I'd like to talk about, since I don't work on a campus, I do work at a system, and I'm always looking at disaggregated data. And one of the things that I want to just put out there is that disaggregated data is really important for everybody to be looking at. When it comes to Indigenous students, this is a bit of a precarious situation. You'll find that we tend to be invisible on campuses. We're either absent or we're invisible. But if we're on campuses, what ends up happening is we become invisible in the data sets because they say our N is too small. That makes statistical sense to me, but that doesn't make moral sense. And it is not a good strategy for student success, because if you don't see us in the data, then you're not going to be tailoring student success interventions to our needs, and no one is allocating resources to help us be successful on campus. So, I think that that's a big problem, because what invisibility conveys to Native students is that we don't belong there. And so I would say that, while I understand the statistical argument is really important, and there's FERPA, which is important, find ways to serve your Native students, engage your Indigenous faculty and staff, and find other ways that you can try to serve them, because, invisibility is the antithesis to student success.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think all of your comments combined really push to make us think more about, whether we're a small campus or a large campus, there's still a lot of students, right? And it's easy for a student to get lost and to feel invisible, to feel unseen, and to withdraw and to not really to engage, and that has all sorts of side effects. And I think all of these kind of best practices and actions that you've talked about really focus on us paying more attention, specific attention to students as individuals. And I think it's a critical piece to kind of that feeling of belonging, is being seen and being acknowledged, and, and being like, hey, I am seen by this institution. So thank you for those best practices and kind of ideas. Kind of moving even a little more particular, as this is a webinar that we're working with ACRO, which is collegiate registrars and admissions officers. And a lot of the folks here probably work in registrars' offices or are related to registrars' offices. Wanted to take a few moments to think about the role of the registrar's office in particular. The registrar's office is kind of the central hub to an institution, having a lot of different purposes, from academic record keeping to class scheduling to maintaining records and transcripts and student service, all sorts of things. The registrar's office is doing a lot. and sometimes individual offices on campuses can feel like, oh, like, okay, maybe DEI isn't something we should be concerned with or should be working on because there's a DEI office to do that, or there's like somebody else to do that. Or sometimes just like, hey, we're too busy, we got all this other stuff going on. So all sorts of reasons, but I think that the registrar's office can play an absolutely critical role in advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging on campuses. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how the registrar's office might be able to contribute to these DEIB efforts on campus. Thinking about things like curricular management, scheduling, policies, forms and processes, student support, student services, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm curious if you want to start off by kind of just some ideas about the role of the registrar's office in this work.
I can let one of my panelists start. I've been going the whole time.
I'm happy to jump in because I've been dealing with this at UT system for a bit. And so I feel like this is really a perfect time to talk about it, is the Gordian knot that can be course scheduling. And what we've found, and I would say talking to my colleagues at other systems, is that course scheduling is often done inefficiently and, dare I say, a little haphazardly, or at least maybe so decentralized that it's not as efficient as it could be. And what I find is that that's an equity issue for many of our students. So across the board, our institutions have struggled mightily with intentional course scheduling. Course scheduling that's predicting both student needs and departmental needs down, a few years down the line. So we actually have an online educational exchange called Finish at UT. And originally the reason why that came into existence is so that students could do just-in-time, take a just-in-time course that's not being offered on their campus, or we even have full consortial degrees on that. But it was really a way to be a stopgap measure to deal with the fact that sometimes we have holes in our course schedules for students who are pursuing particular degree pathways for a variety of reasons. But it is an equity issue, at least for us, because inefficient course scheduling frequently affects, in a disproportionate way, low-income students, working students, parents, and historically minoritized student populations. So many of the systems in Texas are looking at predictive course scheduling, because predictive course scheduling is student-centered scheduling. And I think that more of our institutions need to be doing this. I can't say that we're doing this across our system just yet. Some of our institutions are, but we have not approached it in a systemic sort of way, which I would love to see. But what we find is that, when you have strong predictive course scheduling, it is a strong retention tool, it's a strong graduation tool, and it is a revenue tool. So that inefficient scheduling is going to lose our institutions money. So if you are talking to your leadership and they are not swayed by the argument of the retention and graduation tool, which is very much an asset-based, try the financial argument. But I do encourage you to be looking at your course scheduling in a very critical way.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and I've thought about that. Like, I came from a scheduling background myself, and I think just to add to that a little bit from my experience too, is a lot of times course scheduling is done based on faculty needs, and not based on student needs, and part of that is also working with faculty and trying to help faculty understand the equity needs. So while the administration might really like the financial reasons, that's you know, getting the faculty on board with that too is going to be an important part of it.
And Craig, I will say that that's probably the primary reason that institutions are slow to do that, because it is about a culture shift in some senses, and we want to balance our need for faculty input and autonomy and also our institutional and student-based needs.
Yeah.
I
And I
can
think
add,
this is where sometimes, we're thinking about what can I do as one person in one office? And I think this is where remembering that we're part of community and systems is really important, right? And this is where you can do some work with your colleagues within your office to think about who are our strategic partners and who are the folks who can help us to connect with someone in the provost's office or academic affairs to raise these issues or make them more aware of these challenges that we see so clearly every day because we're in the work, and perhaps they don't see in the same way because they're thinking about a different facet of it. This is where also I think it could be, or it is crucial for folks in a registrar's office to build partnerships with folks like the class deans or the multicultural center directors and the other folks who are on the ground, the CAPS counselors, the therapists who work with students, and just get some information about what they're hearing from the students that they chat with every day, and hearing what those students are griping about, what those students are in their offices upset about, at the end of their rope about, and seeing which of those things have any touch points within the registrar's office. So, and believe those stories and think about how you can start to affect change on those themes within your office, and whom from other offices you might need to partner with to make some larger change happen. Larger change can sometimes be slower and more difficult, but it's important. And just because it's slower and more difficult doesn't mean that we kind of abandon it. It means we try to take one step at a time as we can toward coming up with those resolutions. And partnerships can be huge in that, because oftentimes these problems are very tangled, and they touch many more offices and folks than we have the singular power to impact. But there's power in community. So start building those partnerships, I think, would be one of my suggestions.
I was going to add, my office does oversee scheduling, and one problem we have is that our students have a strong preference for online courses because most of them are working full-time and or are parents or have family obligations. But yet many of them don't excel in online courses as much as they would in a face-to-face class. And so I think knowing the student population is critical, like who are the students and what are their needs. But then if we know that they don't do as well in online courses, then we better make sure that our online courses are of very high quality, that there's built-in interactions between the professors and the students, because those pieces are critical to predicting the success. And so, yeah, so just knowing your students and then scheduling with your students in mind. The other thing that I was thinking to mention related to both of some points you made earlier and just now is about, Nicole, you were talking about Indigenous students maybe not showing up in trends with quantitative data or through the dashboard, institutional research data. And so, and then to April's point, I think that we really need to listen to our students. So we should be collecting qualitative data in addition to the quantitative data, and then designing our interventions and practices around what they're saying their needs are, and like really prioritize the student voice. It's critical. And then the last little piece I'll mention relating to kind of domains that intersect with the registrar. One of the things that we're trying to do here is to get students used to being here sooner than when they enter the university as a student for the first time. So we're trying to build in like summer camps for kids, dual enrollment programs for high school students to be taking classes here. So just that they actually feel a sense of belonging when they get here, that it's not the first time they've been here. They've gotten used to us. We've been part of their life. And so that's how they feel like, this is where I really belong. This is a home. This is familiar to me.
That's a really great point. I really appreciate your point specifically about kind of that qualitative in addition to the quantitative data, and particularly in relation, again, as somebody who came from working in a registrar's office for a great many years, where the registrar's office is often looked at as the data keepers, right? But it's generally that quantitative data. It's those numbers, right? It's very, specific things. But perhaps we can think about as we think about the shifting role of the registrar's office in general, are there ways in which registrar's offices can be thinking about being keepers of qualitative data as well, and doing that work to not just there's plenty of work to be done in data keeping, record keeping, and reporting and all that, and that's I'm understand that is a huge amount of work to be done, and adding more to that could be complicated. But I think you make a really great point that that could be incredibly valuable to collect that information in a more systemic way, to make that available. And how do you get that out? How do you fill in that picture in a broader sense? So I appreciate that. Thank you. So I think I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit to kind of the final set of questions that we had prepared, and think about really kind of action plans. So we've been talking a lot about, here's some best practices, here's some thoughts on kind of maybe the roles of the registrar's office, here's different things we can do. But where do we go from here, right? As somebody who is going to be sitting and listening to this, saying these are great ideas, how do they take those ideas and run with them? So wondering if you have any kind of thoughts, advice on what steps folks can take to take these ideas and put them into action, to bring them back to their campuses. What are those practical things that you've seen work that can really move these initiatives forward, get past barriers, get past resistance? And I know you've talked a little bit about, April, you mentioned kind of being part of a larger community and leveraging that community. But what are some other ideas that you might have on how we take and run with these ideas?
One thing that I would say is maybe a little bit meta, I guess, is that it's going to feel like there is so much to do, because there is so much to do. And oftentimes, when we feel that there is so much to do and we can't do everything, we end up not doing anything. And so my advice for taking action would be like, don't let yourself feel that, right? Progress matters. Pick one or two things that you think are actionable in a sustainable and like real, like substantive way right now, and focus on doing those and doing them well and getting them set up, and then move on to the next. Because if you try to say, okay, I heard this many suggestions and that reminds me of these other suggestions, and you try to do all of them at once, you're spreading yourself too thin. It's going to feel unmanageable, particularly as we all have plates that are overflowing and are overloaded. So pick one or two, start there, and commit to continuing to pick one or two and keep building.
I'll jump in here. I will say that, kind of adding to what April was talking about earlier around, building your community. If you belong to a system, you can reach out to system leadership and ask to be convened if you are not already. So UT system, for example, we convene the enrollment leads, we convene ed deans, we convene student affairs leads, student success leaders. And through that process, you create a community of practice where you can really share best practices, you share your challenges, and then you can problem solve right then and there with a group of folks who understand your context. So that would be one of my biggest suggestions. We found that to be super valuable. I would also say, I think that DE&I and belonging is pretty well supported in a lot of states. In Texas, not so much. And so some of you all might be in states that are a little bit more like Texas versus California, for example. And I would say that, even if you cannot do this work by naming it, you're still doing it anytime you are focused on serving the individual student and focused on student success. So keep your focus on that. It's really easy if you live in states like Texas or in the South to feel a little bit of grief and feeling like you can't make a difference. But as long as you're serving the student, you are going to be serving the ends of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So I will say that. And the last thing I will say is build your political capital every chance you get. And you do that through relationship building and actually letting folks understand what it is you are doing to serve student success.
My tips are very aligned with my co-presenters. So I think that you have to do what is within your capacity to do. Each of us occupies different roles. Each of us are connected to different people. And so you have to take an assessment of what can you influence to know what you can implement. And so, just one example, now that I'm at the institutional level with my position, I started a women's leadership group called Growing Leadership Opportunities for Women, GLOW. And so that was within my influence right now. I could do that within my current position. But other times it might be like at the departmental level, establishing a DEI fellow. We have fellows all over the university at the department level, in colleges, different units. The other thing I would suggest is meet people where they are. I think April alluded to that as well. And so not everyone's at the same place and they aren't going to be as responsive. So use data when you need to demonstrate that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And again, as I mentioned, that can be both quantitative and qualitative data, but that's very important because then it's not just an anecdote or a person's opinion, that there are data to demonstrate that gaps exist and discrimination is real. And then the final thing I guess I could mention is don't stay silent, because when you stay silent, people think you might agree with whatever was just said that is totally inappropriate. So yeah, and I guess the point of the GLOW thing is to get connected with the like-minded individuals. So not like-minded in diverse perspectives are extremely valuable, but like-minded in that we're all in this fight together. We need the support because the work is exhausting and we are going to need to vent or to rely on one another for information or resources. So having that network of people that Nicole mentioned, tapping into those networks is critical.
Great, thank you. Yeah, all very, very, very good tips for kind of moving these things forward. And I'll just add to it, leverage what you have, and as I work for CourseLeaf, and I'll give a little bit here for CourseLeaf, and one of the things that I do in my role is talk about how our software can be leveraged for your own institutional DEI goals. Whether you're using CourseLeaf or not, you have tools that are available to you that can be leveraged in different unique ways. Sometimes we just have to think a little bit outside of the box, and a lot of these ideas can be brought into the tools we have too. So I talk about using our class scheduling system to help solve some of these equity issues, or using the catalog to help promote belonging through use of language and imagery and that sort of thing. And we just part of our company's goal and pursuit of encouraging DEIB and helping our clients, we just launched a new tool called an inclusive language curriculum tool, which is going to allow our institutions to create custom rules around the use of inclusive language, so that the catalogs can be putting that inclusive language out there. So there's lots of things you can do, and I had to give my little plug for CourseLeaf here, of course. But I think, at CourseLeaf, we are very dedicated to pushing forward diversity, equity, inclusion, and supporting our clients and supporting higher ed in general, which is part of the reason that we wanted to sponsor this webinar, bring these wonderful panelists together to try to get that information out, to try to help each other, help us each other support each other, and provide best practices and share our knowledge with each other, because that's how we really move things forward, is by working together. None of us can do this on our own. We can all have individual impact, certainly, but when we work together, when we support each other, when we share with each other, that impact is going to be significantly greater. So I want to take a moment just to thank our panelists, Nicole, Kelly, April. Really appreciate your time this afternoon and prepping for this, and just taking this hour to talk. I also want to thank ACRO for allowing us to be a sponsor of this webinar. And thank you all for attending. We appreciate you being here. If you have any questions, again, we weren't able to have a formal Q&A, but feel free to route those to me, ccanfield@courseleaf.com. That's C-C-A-N as in Nancy, F-I-E-L-D, ccanfield@courseleaf.com. And I can try to get your questions answered. Otherwise, that's what we have for you. And again, thank you so much, and we wish you a wonderful afternoon.